Show of hands, who here has seen Pokemon Horizons? It's good. Like, genuinely good. I know a lot of people are quick to dismiss this show just because Ash isn't the protagonist anymore, but I seriously think it's worth checking out if you haven't already. Being completely honest here, I actually stopped watching the Pokemon anime back during the Best Wishes era, and mostly decided to check out Horizons on a whim one day when I had nothing better to do. I marathoned the first 12 episodes of the show, which were all that were out at the time, and found myself pleasantly surprised at just how much I was enjoying it. Since then, I've been making an effort to catch each new episode as it comes out. While there were definitely some episodes of Horizons that I thought were weaker than others, as a whole, I'm genuinely invested in this show and what it's trying to do with its story and characters. In fact, some of the people that I've spoken to about it have even claimed that they're way more invested in Horizons than they have been in the mainline games for years. It's gotten me thinking, why is that? Is the writing and direction of the new anime really that much better than that of the video games? Well, after mulling the matter over for a while, I've come to the conclusion that things may not be quite that simple. The Pokemon series has had its ups and downs in recent years. Despite that, it remains by far one of the most popular and profitable IPs on the planet. Though the games, which many would argue are the core of the franchise, actually only make up a relatively small percentage of that revenue. Pokemon makes the vast majority of its profits primarily through other mediums such as the anime and all the surrounding merchandise. But if you want a full breakdown of all that, I recommend checking out Foxcade's video on the subject. What I want to focus on is a particular element of the games that causes them to stand out from the rest of the series. And no, it's not just the debatable quality of the latest entries. See, the mainline Pokemon games are turn-based RPGs. The battle system revolves around opponents standing across from each other and taking turns throwing out attacks. I think most people generally understand that this style of combat is more a representation of what's actually happening than an accurate portrayal of how the fights are canonically going down. Realistically, the characters in this game are moving around and not necessarily waiting for an opponent to act before doing something. But why is that a big deal? Tons of games have this style of combat, and it's not usually something that warrants that much discussion or attention. Well, I think the issue is that Pokemon in particular has accidentally created a wider than average disconnect between its gameplay and its world. Pokemon battles, as we the players see them, are radically different than how they're meant to be playing out in the lore, and this has had some noticeably detrimental effects on the games. Take Geeta, for example. Prior to the DLC, many panned her as one of the worst Pokemon champions we'd ever seen. We're told that she's supposed to be a fearsomely strong trainer, a champion among champions, La Primera. Yet most players find the actual battle with her in the Pokemon League to be underwhelming. Her team seems focused more around the gimmick of representing each area of Paldea than any sort of cohesive strategy. The actual Pokemon she uses varies from pretty good to subpar, and even the order that she sends them out onto the field doesn't make a great deal of sense. However, that's all looking at it from a gameplay perspective. Go-Goat and Avalugg might not seem that impressive based on their stats and move pool, which they aren't, but in a world where they aren't restricted by turn order or stats, these could very well be the strongest of their species. Imagine Geeta's Go-Goat running circles around your Pokemon, or her Avalugg shrugging off super effective moves because it's been trained to just be that tough. I mean, you wouldn't think that a first stage starter would be able to go up against a meta-breaking legendary, right? The legendary would probably one-shot the starter 9 times out of 10. And yet, in the anime, we actually recently saw just such a battle playing out. I won't spoil anything too major, but let's just say that if you never thought a Fuecoco could stand up to a freaking Rayquaza, you might be surprised. In the games, this would hardly even be a contest, but the anime is a totally different beast. Honestly, the fact that Horizons isn't bound to the mechanics of the game is a big part of what makes it so appealing, at least to me. To be fair, the anime has always played around with the idea of moves being used in unconventional ways or strategies that only work in real-time combat, but this show has consistently blown my mind with how creative it gets. Like, there's an episode where a villain uses a combo attack of Psychic and Electro Ball that makes the Electro Ball's path super erratic and difficult to dodge. There's an episode where we see Ember being used to effectively fly for a short time. Or how about running around in a circle with a Volt Tackle to create a freaking electric tornado? That is stuff that you just don't see in the games. You can't. A lot of people will bash Pokemon for being too easy, and while I think that is somewhat subjective based on your team and how you choose to play, I can't deny that just knowing the game mechanics well can make the overall experience relatively trivial 9 times out of 10. Like, most random trainers you encounter in the overworld are just fodder for XP and money. But imagine them fighting how people would in the anime. Pokemon moving around, making use of their environment, and utilizing moves in creative, unconventional ways. Bet you'd have a bit more respect for youngster Joey then, huh? There's also the core messaging to consider. I mean, the whole idea of Pokemon is that they're supposed to be your partners and friends, right? The anime consistently tries to portray good trainers as those who genuinely care for and raise the Pokemon they battle with, while only bad trainers and villains view them as things to use or collect. That's rather ironic when the games build themselves an entire foundation on treating Pokemon as collectibles. Like, the whole tagline of the series is gotta catch 'em all, and filling out the Pokedex involves catching a bunch of Pokemon that you most likely will never use and sticking them in a PC box forever. Sun and Moon even had a gag about that, calling out players who do this sort of thing, but when catching a bunch of Pokemon is such a core mechanic of the series, it's hard not to. Many trainers you encounter in the world, including gym leaders, won't even have a full team of 6 because they don't go out of their way to catch Pokemon for no real reason. In the anime, a main character getting a new Pokemon is treated as a special event. In the games, though, odds are most people are just catching Pokemon by the dozens, either to fill out the Pokedex or just to have more variety in their roster. I myself am guilty of hunting down Pokemon of specific types purely to use in a gym battle, and then barely ever touching them again after the fact. Though the games try to encourage you to care about the Pokemon in your party, the fact is that there's just this inherent disconnect between the lore and the mechanics that makes it kind of impossible to truly form that connection, at least on the same level as the characters from the show. I mean, people love Ash's Pikachu so much, specifically, because Ash's Pikachu is a character. He's a Pikachu that we as an audience come to know as he accompanies Ash on the journey to become the very best. However, a Pikachu in the game is just that, a random Pikachu. It has no character or personality and is fundamentally indistinguishable from any other members of its species aside from its stats. And to be clear, this isn't necessarily meant to be me bashing on the Pokemon games, even though I do have my gripes with them in other areas. This is more so meant to be an analysis of why I think Pokemon fundamentally works better in other mediums. The contrast between Pokemon's mechanics and the lore makes it uniquely difficult to get invested compared to other turn-based RPGs, at least in the way that Game Freak intends. What someone in the game might describe as an intense battle through dialogue might actually be a complete sweep from the player's perspective. The value of forming unique bonds with your Pokemon tends to get lost when you have entire boxes full of unused creatures you got for the sake of completionism. It's an issue that I don't hear that many people talk about, but one that is embedded into the very core of the main series. Honestly, I myself am not totally sure how one would even begin to go about addressing this matter. So I turn the question over to you all. How do you think the gap between Pokemon's gameplay and lore could be bridged, if possible? Should the series try exploring different genres and styles of combat? Do you think putting a harder limit on catchable Pokemon would help build players' attachment to their party? Or do you think this issue doesn't really need to be addressed at all? Leave your thoughts and comments down below, and until next time, stay bright.